I would say when it comes to selecting one of these tools, don't just buy one or chase one just because you saw a demo or you attended an event.
Yeah.
You need to bring it in-house. You should stand them up, two or three of them side by side, and run a comparison.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Craig Duckworth.
And I'm Dino Busalaki.
And today, I think we should talk about the CISO's expanded role in OT as organizations are trying to figure out how they incorporate their manufacturing in their overall enterprise security. How's that sound?
Okay. Sounds like an IT-OT convergence conversation.
It is, but I think it's bigger than that. We see a lot of organizations providing, let's call it responsibility to the CISO to now be over and include security for their manufacturing and their industrial control space.
Yeah. Think of how wide of a net they're going to have to cast, right?
Part of it, again, back to semantics on words, because I have responsibility doesn't always mean that I have authority. And how do organizations address that? How do they provide both so that it's cohesive? We'll start there.
Well, if you're a manufacturing organization and you're the CISO, CIO, really anybody in IT leadership, you need to start thinking about how you get your arms around the OEMs and the system integrators who are implementing and supporting technologies in your manufacturing facilities. Because we come from that world, right? We're an OEM, we're a system integrator, many years, decades working in manufacturing. And what I would say is that there's very little to no influence coming from IT in regards to cybersecurity strategies and practices that's being influenced into these system integrators and OEMs that are working in your manufacturing facilities. A lot of manufacturers, they might have several system integrators working at one site. And if you got 30 plants in your fleet, you could have a couple of dozen different system integrators that are doing everything from putting in networks. They're obviously putting in systems, control systems, but it's still Windows systems and PLCs and historians and engineering workstations and application servers and wireless and Bluetooth, the whole bevy of technologies that are being implemented in these plants that aren't necessarily under some strategic direction coming from what I would say is IT leadership trying to influence these groups. And so as a CISO, one of the things you're going to have to do is find out who your top 10 or so integrators are that are working in your manufacturing facilities. And you're going to have to start building a relationship with them and vice versa, them with you, in order to really improve your cybersecurity posture within your manufacturing environments.
And I would say that most all CIOs, CISOs have that, let's call it top 10 from an IT perspective. They've got Microsoft, they've got Dell, they've got SAP, they've got all of those on their speed dial. They know who they are, what they're providing to the organization.
And the partners that are supplying that technology, if they're not buying direct.
Yep. So they definitely need to do the same thing in the OT space, but I think it takes a bigger collaboration working with plant management, engineering teams, and asking those questions. Who are these providers? What is the technology? How are you getting it? How are you using it so they can understand it?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more cats to herd in that space than there is on the IT side because they've standardized so much. IT's done a really good job over the last few decades standardizing their technology footprint. Right?
They've had a long time head start.
They have. But on the manufacturing side, you can find hundreds of different technology devices from vendors and suppliers from all over the world that have managed to land inside your plants.
Right. And I would say some of that, and not all, but it comes down to resourcefulness. On the OT manufacturing side, they don't always have the resources to have the newest, the greatest, the best stuff that comes out every 3 to 5 years. We see them buying used things from eBay. We see them shopping the cheapest, most effective way to get from A to B with the least cost. And that's just what happens. It's not always about all the bells and whistles.
Well, and sometimes they'll take equipment out of one plant and move it to another plant because they're putting in new assets in this plant. And so these assets are still pretty good, and they'll shift them to another plant.
Right.
Yeah, that's very common too, versus buying from boneyards and eBay, to your point, unless your capital plan is significant enough that when it comes to life cycle replacement and prioritizing what you're going to go after to replace in your environment. But even then, who's doing that work? And chances are pretty high that it's an OEM and a system integrator that's providing those machines and building those machines and the SCADA systems, control systems, and network to go around them and implementing them in your plant. And in a lot of cases, they are also your second and third tier support arm. If the plant can't solve the problem locally, they're going to want to jump and call their system integrator. And if the system integrator thinks it's a bug or something going on with Rockwell, then of course they'll take it to Rockwell. But so you have that support mechanism that could be 2 or 3 deep in your plant.
Yeah. Let's see if we can kind of walk through to help the audience, maybe some of the, let's call them strategic questions that organizations, CISO, CIO, IT leadership really need to begin asking themselves from an organizational standpoint to prepare for this journey. You've got everything from governance and leadership all the way through how do we implement, how do we have authority to go in and make the changes that we've been tasked with from a responsibility standpoint? Or, as we normally see, are you going to get kneecapped as soon as you get to the front door of the plant? So how do organizations tackle that? What's your thoughts?
They got to get in front of it. You have to have a better view into your capital plan to determine what assets are they going out there to rip and replace and or expand, brownfield, greenfield expansion, product changes, et cetera. And also with procurement too, because procurement is going to probably be involved in the conversation when you're working with those OEM and system integrators. So as an IT leader, it'd be good to keep your finger on the pulse of your capital plan and procurement on proposals that are going out the door in regards to your manufacturing plants. All right, that way you can at least get an idea of what's coming. Determine who are those partners, because I, as a CISO, would like to talk to them to find out what are their OT cybersecurity capabilities. Who are your partners? What technologies are you using? What kind of references do you have? Right? And try to interview them to get as much information as you can from those integrators to determine how they can help you, because a lot of the system integrators do not have a cybersecurity practice. They just don't, and which is part of the problem. There are those that do. We are one of those, right? So you got to really find out who are your top tier integrators that seem to be the most mature with an OT cybersecurity practice, and also be able to demonstrate that with the partners that they have, the Clarities and the Armises and the Ciscos and the Zomi Networks and Dragos, et cetera. Do they have those partnerships? And then references to the work that they've been doing for the last several years in this particular space.
Yeah, and part of it goes back to budget. We hear over and over, and we've experienced this in the last several years. IT holds the budget. IT holds the budget. We don't have the budget in OT. We don't have the money. So how do they get the money? Do they take and incorporate it into the IT budget? Do they take a big chunk of money from IT and say, oh, this is yours in OT now, you get to use this? What is the right amount of spend? What's your thought?
So back to that capital plan, right? Because a lot of this stuff you could buy as part of the capital plan, right? You're buying a $20 million piece of equipment and it's got computers and networking equipment in it. It's all built into that $20 million project, right? And so let's say you're a Clarity shop, for example, you've made that decision, you've rolled it out, but you know that you don't have the depth of visibility that you want. Any new machines coming in, you should be speccing in sensors into the panels that are going out there to collect that metadata to get it back to your Clarity platform. So from a budgeting standpoint, it's not that it has to necessarily come out of the IT budget as much as it might be able to be built into that capital project versus the OpEx model or the maintenance, the plant's maintenance budget. And because this is such a new area of concern around OT cybersecurity, there's not really good models per se when you think about the cost, because one, you don't really know how many assets you have. You can guesstimate, and many do. And I will tell you, most of them are off anywhere from 30% to 100% off on their count, because they don't know what's out there in those plans.
Yeah.
You have that challenge, and then you have to determine what kind of resources you have in-house. Can you even pull this off by yourself, right? When you start building that budget, and you're going to have to do some piloting and go through tier 1 plans, tier 2 plans, just to get an idea of what it's going to take to get these platforms in place, get them up and running, be able to optimize them, be able to tune them, get the benefit and value out of them. And it might take you a year in a single plan. If you got 30 plans, it's going to take you a number of years to get through this to determine what's it going to really cost. If you have 100 plans, you're talking about several years worth of work, and maybe in the 4th year, you'll figure out what it really costs to do this and run this and maintain it and manage it.
But organizations can't wait. If I've got 100 plants in my fleet and it takes me a year to get to the first one, I don't have 100 years to wait for this.
I didn't say you can run parallel. You can run parallel.
Yeah, I know. But again, is it 5 a year and it takes 20 years? Do I need to try and do 20? What's a number that's achievable? And part of that is choose a partner. Organizations don't have to do this all on their own from the beginning. Find someone that, I agree,
They can't. Not by themselves. Not today they can't, especially if you're starting at ground zero. You can't do this by yourself. And if you do, you will take a decade to get through it if you got that size and scope of a fleet of plants in your organization.
By that time, the technology is stale, their vulnerabilities are through the roof, and who knows what's going to happen in the next 10 years.
Yeah, and the CISO will be on to another job, because what's the average tenure?
Be on his third job.
Yeah, but you have to begin, right? You have to just demonstrate that you're getting better. And you're really, in order to make it work, you're going to have to incorporate the suppliers that are working in your manufacturing environment. You're going to have to solicit them to assist for those that are capable of doing that, or you got to start providing them direction to do the work that you need to have done to continue with your OT cybersecurity strategy within your manufacturing environment.
Well, yeah, the supply chain you mentioned is critical. If I've got 30 suppliers for my manufacturing site, my ability to stay cyber resilient is only as strong as the weakest link in that chain. And what do they provide to me, and how does that work to make sure that I can have a stronger resilience? And is that through procurement? Is that through what's the method to help bring them along with you as you look at these practices?
And I would say when it comes to selecting one of these tools, don't just buy one or chase one just because you saw a demo or you attended an event.
Yeah.
You need to bring it in-house. You should stand them up, 2 or 3 of them side by side, and run a comparison, right?
Mm-hmm.
And get the OT teams to participate in it. If you're going to do it right, I think that's the best way of moving forward, is pick the top 2 or 3 technologies out there in the marketplace today, get them into your plant and run a side-by-side comparison, make sure all the key stakeholders are involved in the decision-making, and then from there, let's say you spend a month or 2 months doing that. And then you've made your selection. And now you can start working on what's the licensing cost going to be for X amount of plants, how big are these plants. Now I've got a rough idea of how many assets I may have, and I may not have exact numbers, but I've got a pretty good idea based on the size and scope of this facility. If I got 3 tiers of plants, this one's going to have over 5,000 assets in it. This one's going to have between 2,000 and 3,000 assets in it, and these are going to have less than 1,000. And that way you can get your licensing model figured out to some extent, because that's how the vendors have priced the software, is based on the number of assets that you have. And it's OT assets, not IT assets. And then you have to think about your team. And it's going to be a blend. To be able to move further and faster is having folks that have relevant experience in doing this. That way you can hit the ground running, and the organization can learn over that year time frame while they're determining whether they're going to build a practice or not, or they're always going to have a hybrid approach, or they're always going to outsource it.
And part of the struggle, maybe it's not a struggle, internal resources are normally stretched thin, are not looking for work to do. and are not equipped from a skill set and a capability to take on some of these technologies. They're not, it's something that's in their wheelhouse. They're working on break fix, they're working on maintenance, they're working on the PLCs, the hardware that's there today. They're not trying to figure out how to do that.
Right. And I was going to say something in regards to, from the OT perspective, when it comes to leveraging these tools and how you want to get this deployed, is having, as I stated, organizations that are there to assist you, right? There has to be some buy-in from your OEMs and your system integrators, and there's those that can help you with the deployment. And then because it's more than cybersecurity, remember, there's also an integrity component to this, right? Especially if your plant's experiencing unusual, unplanned, unscheduled downtime, meaning there's things that happen in the environment, they're not really sure what creates this disruption. These tools really do a good job of helping uncover that, right? And so when you're making your selection process, you want to walk through some of those scenarios and make your decisions based on what is a benefit both the IT and the OT group.
Yeah, because these tools and technologies today are beginning to play higher in the stack. They are understanding and interpreting IoT and some IT protocols. They are not only doing the OT, but they are doing other feature functionality as well. Some are better than others, but they are trying to be more all-encompassing than just a one-tool product.
And the other thing I would say is, especially for those IT organizations, you're going to have your preferred IT VAR, right, that you buy from. Whether you buy your Cisco stuff from, you buy your Microsoft stuff from. And there are those out there that will sell these OT intrusion detection platforms. That's the easy part. Buying. The hard part, especially for those IT VARs, is the deployment, or even the consulting companies, right? They're going to have to rely on somebody that works inside these manufacturing environments on a pretty regular, consistent basis. And that's typically not your IT groups, and that's not your consulting groups. They can give you an idea on architecture and how to maybe set this stuff up, but actually using it really is going to fall back into organizations that work on that industrial side of the fence. So what I'm trying to say is that if you're working with an IT VAR that you're really comfortable with, and you like, and they're selling OT cybersecurity technology, it's great, fine. But you really got to find somebody that can take that spinning tire and get it on the road. And we can say that because we work with a lot of those IT VARs who are selling this technology into these manufacturing environments, and then they're coming to us for deployment and delivery and the adoption, and then customizing it, tuning it, optimizing it. Usually falls to those folks that are comfortable being around those control systems. So just keep that in mind. Even if you got an IT partner that's doing a good job of selling you the technology, great. But just remember, now you got to deploy it. And that's where those folks are going to pull back, and they're going to say, we got to go find somebody else to go do that. And a lot of these IT VARs are actually buddying up with engineering companies, integrators like us, to help them with that. So keep that in mind.
Yep. Let's shift gears just a smidgen if we can. And let's talk about remote access, secure remote access, privilege management access, whatever you want to call it, into the OT controls environment. We hear a lot about, I've got a VPN, I've got yada, yada, yada. And we as a firm sell multiple products. Some are much better than others. Some are very, let's call them budget friendly. Some are very technically savvy and provide things like over-the-shoulder capabilities, recording capabilities, audit trail, all of the things that an IT secure access would have, purpose-built for the OT space. Because we're seeing a whole myriad of organizations now that we're seeing like 6 or 7 different ways to get into these environments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we find that all the time. On average, 4 to 7 different remote access technologies being used. A lot of them are being implemented by these OEMs and system integrators, right? As part of the project. Here they are working on a $20 million packaging line of sorts, and they put in their own remote access solutions in order to gain access to that for support or to work remotely for whatever reason. And so you end up with a wide range. And Sometimes it goes through the IT channels and sometimes it doesn't. But even through the IT channels, it's just a VPN connection, right? And nobody really knows what that vendor's doing once they're inside there, right? Because one, it's an encrypted conversation from wherever that third party is down to that PLC that they're connecting to. And then once they get to the PLC and they've landed, what are they doing while they're there? What do they have access to while they're there? Can they move around the network at that level? Can you control them just to work on that particular device? Can you control the protocols that they're using so that they can only maybe read only versus read and write? Can't do file transfer, right? Keeping them, preventing them from installing other applications or stealing IP. So you got to have better remote access tools that provide that visibility and that control than what you with just a VPN connection. It's just not adequate enough anymore for that. Again, back to process integrity, control system integrity, OT network integrity, whatever vernacular you want to put on it. That VPN is not sufficient enough. Password vaulting. You want to be able to have a tool like that. Arc does that. Yeah. Okay. But will it do it down at this control system? Will it record the conversation between that user and that device? And again, can you role base it? Can you schedule it? There's some things that you want to be able to really do in order to control that user experience and that profile when they're trying to access a control system for support, or they're just going in and doing some general maintenance, or they're just poking around.
Yeah. And one thing that organizations, speaking of remote access, is going to have to address, they're going to have to figure out when they run into the OEM or the equipment manufacturer that throws a roadblock or a hurdle that says, look, if you touch my stuff, we're going to void the warranty. You're on your own. We're not going to support it any longer. And you as an organization know that you don't have the skill sets. You're relying upon that vendor to provide that maintenance, support, guidance, preventative, whatever they're doing. Any thoughts on how organizations try and approach that to work that in the best they can? Was that through procurement? Is that through legal? What's your thoughts, or what have you seen work better?
Well, the sooner the better. You don't want to do it after the fact, because otherwise they'll put in what they want and it'll end up in your plant. So it's part of those earlier discussions you have to have. As I said, the CIO and the CISO have to start building relationships with these groups to set expectations, determine what those standards, what those policies, what the governance is, and start working with them and setting that stuff up. You may have to show them why this remote access technology you want to use is better than the VPN ones that they want to use, and here's all the reasons why. It's not that it's making it complicated for the SI to gain access into that. Most of the stuff is just using a web browser, but the deal is that you're shifting, their graphical user interface and the tool that they're using to get into that device with something that has stricter controls around it. When you get back to the OEM and the SI, you're going to have to begin those conversations early. For those machines that are already out there, you're going to have to demonstrate to them and show them that what you're wanting to do is passive and it's not going to be disruptive and it's for the betterment of all, than just them worrying about you getting in there and changing things, which is what the OEM is really concerned about. Are you going to invalidate the integrity of that device because you added something onto the network that's down there in that control system that they think might cause problems?
More of let's call it education and working with that partnership with that OEM to say, look, everything's the same. You still have access as you need it through our environment into your machine. We still want you to support it, maintain it. We're changing the method that you're going to use to get to that machine. It still has all these controls. You have everything that you need. It's a different process. And again, it goes back to that change. None of us like change. I don't like to change. No one does. So as an organization, it's understanding how to position that with the vendor, with the OEM, and explaining the reason that you as a company are moving to a more secure cyber practice. And this is part of that posturing. Yeah. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah, you just have to have conversations with them while you're doing what you're doing and then show it to them.
Yeah.
Because the OT guys aren't going to do it. They're not going to spin the cycles trying to do that. The IT guys are the only ones that are going to, and those that understand this are going to be able to convey that message to those SIs and OEMs.
Yeah. And I would say the last thing I want to touch on today to round it out, if we look at from a strictly a NIST standpoint, is the respond and recover. If you look at an OT-centric response plan, incident response, how different that is from an IT and the different players. Your frontline responders are the operators, and making sure that as you're developing and practicing those plans, that you're incorporating and including that OT team that is on the front lines, because that's sometimes a miss when organizations try and figure that out.
And I would say that most OT organizations know how to shut their machines down safely, right? And so when you talk about a first responder, which is going to be the operator, already has a pretty good idea on what it takes to get that machine to a safe state without destroying the product or breaking the equipment or hurting anybody until the greater, broader incident response plan starts unfolding based on the event that's hitting you.
But if that individual is not part of the phone tree of who do I call first to safely shut that equipment down, if there's an incident on the IT side, they're not going to know to start turning things off. So they've got to be part of the plan.
And for them, the operator is not going to shut down the machine because some IT guy called them. They're going to shut it down. The plant manager called up and said, you need to shut that machine down.
Right.
And so, again, it's just schematics, but as far as practicing an IR plan, because I will tell you as a system integrator, we don't ever have the client sit down and talk to us about what their IR plan is while you're in there working. If an incident was, if we have a breach while you're here, what does that mean to us? How should we respond? How should we react? What should we do?
Yeah. No, it's all critically important discussions that CISOs or CIOs or IT leadership, as you are being tasked to bring cyber hygiene into the manufacturing of your organization, all questions that need to be addressed, whether that's in a tabletop discussion with your leadership team, if that's with the individuals that are responsible for the plants, operations, COO, VP of engineering, whatever the title is, those chain of commands are important, that they have to be part of it. And again, you guys have heard this 100 times. Don't do this alone. Organizations like ours are positioned to help you with this, positioned to guide you, to work alongside you. There's all kinds of resources out there. Take advantage of them.
Yeah, the long and short of this entire discussion is that CISOs, you're going to have to make some new friends. And you have to make that determination on whether you want to really build a bridge to the organization that your company spends millions and millions of dollars with.
Oh, yeah.
In your manufacturing environments, right? Buying control system technology, designing and building those machines, and then maintaining and supporting those machines. And so you're going to have to get your hooks into them at some point if your role and goal is to take overall responsibility for OT cybersecurity. And if you're really going to pursue that, you're going to have to make some new friends.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
Any parting thoughts before we go?
Nope.
I think we covered a lot today, so I'm pleased with what we got done. Have a great day, guys.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.